Hi, it's Steve Hargadon, and this is Tiny is Beautiful, a webinar series. And we've got Macy Miller here from minimotives.com. Macy, welcome.
Hey, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Oh, such a delight. I have this great story of meeting you for the first time. I'm at the Jamboree, and I see this woman and her daughter walk in matching polka dot dresses. And I'm like, this is so cool. So I actually, do you remember I went over and introduced
I do.
myself? I had no idea who you were. I thought you were
That's
just
so funny. Yeah, because you remember it well, you mentioned that you knew me in the middle of our conversation. I was like, that's why I thought you were talking to me.
Anyway, so this is actually not a webinar. This is your keynote for the summit. This is it. This is the keynote. Yeah, we're doing it early because you have snow day.
Yes. We have almost 2 feet of snow in our little town, which gets maybe 1 or 2 inches here and there. So it's pretty much shut down the city right now.
You mean the non-existent snow plows are still under shed somewhere?
Well, they hit the main roads, but I've been stuck in the driveway for 6 days. I can't get my car out. So, and that's pretty typical. The schools, actually, we hardly ever have snow days, and we're going on 6 in a row right now because the whole city is literally just shut down right now. They don't know what to do. So it's crazy.
Well, your struggle is our gain. I'm sorry that you're going through that, but we're really delighted that it gives some time to do this.
Yeah.
Okay, so can you tell your story a little bit? You probably do that a lot, but for those who don't know you.
Yeah, I can tell a story. How's that one? My story gets portrayed a lot of ways because I'm that crazy girl that lives in the tiny house with the Great Dane sometimes, and sometimes it's my poor abused children that have to live here with me and everything. But the real story is, in 2011, I had this wonky dream that I built this tiny space, and it was just. It had everything that I needed. At the time, I was a single person. I just worked and lived, and I didn't really have a lot of stuff. I've never really been a collector of things. And so I, in my head, I designed this space that fit everything that I needed and nothing more, nothing less. My day job is architectural design. So in my head, it all worked out. And then I kind of woke up and I was like, why don't people do this more? And I started researching, and I was researching boat appliances and stuff to kind of make this work. And I ran across Jay Schaefer, of course. And then I was like, oh, people do this. Okay. And then the next week I bought a trailer and I started building my weird little dream. And along the way, I met a boy whose name is James. I actually met several. I have the whole dating, while building a tiny house, and people think you're crazy. But it really just helps you select the right partner, in my experience. So I met a boy who didn't run away, while we were dating, and he actually picked up a hammer and helped me start building. And then we finished it together. Eventually, he moved in. We had a daughter. A year and a half later, we had a son. We got our puppy, Denver, Great Dane. And we've been living full-time in the tiny house for coming up on 4 years now. So I've kind of had all the experiences. I've lived here as a single person. I've lived here as a parent. I've lived here with a dog. Now it's 4 people full-time with a dog. And we have 4 seasons, like I mentioned. It's 2 feet of snow right now. We get up to about, I think it was 114 was the max temp we've been in. And the minimum temp, we've been down to -14. So I live in all the seasons. I've got advice for people. If they want advice, I openly give it. So, and then, and when my daughter was born, it actually, to mention why I give advice, when my daughter was born, this house provided me the opportunity to quit my day job. So now I just work for myself from home. I'm a blogger mostly. Well, mostly I'm a mother, but then I'm a blogger. And I help other people try to figure out this path and navigate it and find out how and if it will work for them. So that's what I'm here for.
So it feels like the story for you is this combination of do-it-yourself architecture, design, and freedom. What are the main drivers for you?
Life's a funny, messy place. And I'm a bootstrapper, and I have placed myself very solidly behind the do-it-yourselfer in this movement. As things have grown, when I was building, I had to explain what a tiny house was to absolutely everyone I met. I'd be introduced as the girl with the tiny house, and then I'd spend a half hour explaining what a tiny house is, even though it feels like it should be self-explanatory. Um, and now everybody knows what a tiny house is. I'm still introduced as that tiny house girl. But with that is a lot of industry has popped up, a lot of businesses trying to promote things. And coming from the construction industry myself, I know how convoluted it can start to be and how it can start to feel. And everybody's saying there's one right way about this, when in reality, every single construction practice was invented for a reason. And the more you can kind of understand why something started to happen, the more you can make the right decisions for you going forward. And myself, I'm a pretty independent person, and I like that. That's what I really like about the movement, is it kind of enables people to reassess their life and approach it on their own terms. And a big part of that is doing this journey yourself and figuring out how to make it happen, figuring out your best reasons why, and then approaching that. And I think the best way you can possibly do that is to build your own house, or at least understand it well enough to give direction as to why you want it a certain way. And there are a lot of choices. I'm grateful that I built when I did, because there wasn't as much information out there. There wasn't as many wrong ways published about how to do a tiny house. When in reality, there's thousands of right ways to do it. The only wrong way is to stop yourself in your own tracks. So
there are several threads I want to follow here. I guess the first would be, what about zoning and requirements and the like? Have they been hard for you?
Well, that's interesting too. That's another reason I was supposed to meet with my city this week, because I got my code violation. Because right now it's a matter of if, or a matter of when, not if. I lived here for 3.5 years before I got a code violation. And what had happened was there was a big development that was happening across the street from us. And it's a 50-unit low-income housing unit. And it's great. Our city needs low-income housing, but it caused a huge uproar, like low-income housing often does. And I think what happened was it drew a lot of attention towards my tiny house. And I think, based on conversations I've had, no one can tell me exactly what the complaint was or who did it. And I don't honestly care. They're within their right to complain about me, because tiny houses are not currently all that legal right now, which is something I've been working to change myself. But I think what happened was it drew a lot of attention to, the lot across the street from me. And I think some uninformed person probably placed a little bit of blame on me that I'm making the neighborhood a magnet for this low-income housing development, when it couldn't be less true. And tiny houses are a great way to have owner-occupied affordable housing within a city. So what it's done is provide a great opportunity for me to talk with the city. So I got my code violation just before Halloween in October. They gave me 30 days to vacate the property or make it legal. I went down and met with them. And actually, it was a funny story, because I was on a panel 2 days after I got my code violation with the head of the department who gave me the code violation. We were on a panel to discuss the viability of tiny houses and owner-occupied affordable housing. And he didn't know that I had gotten the code violation. Just his guy sent it out 2 days before I was on this panel with him. And I felt really bad, because he was basically thrown under the bus in front of 30 other planners in the state, who now are like emailing him constantly, like, what are you doing? Because everybody's waiting to see, who's going to handle, who and how is going to, work through this tiny house situation, because it's a big pressure on jurisdictions across the country right now. And so it was very serendipitous timing that happened 2 days before that meeting. And that now I have 30 advocates, that joined this panel to learn how they can incorporate it, that are pestering this guy nonstop about how he's going to handle it. He kind of knows there's a spotlight on it. He knows other people are looking towards, the solution that they find, and they're being really calculated about it, about how we can find a solution to this. But the other serendipitous kind of timing that happened at the same time was Andrew Morrison wrote the tiny house appendix for the IRC. And he had contacted me about 2 months before I got the code violation to try to get it incorporated. And I, was I didn't help him. He did it all himself, but I was a party to the knowledge that there's an appendix going before the ICC board. And so, of course, I jumped on board with that. And so I got this code violation the 2 days before this panel I was speaking on, and 1 week before I flew to Kansas City to defend this IRC appendix at the national hearing that happens once every 3 years, you know. So I got an extension on the code violation because I was actually fighting this issue at a national level. And so the city has been very good to work with because I'm involved at this level on the national scale. And even in their like extension, they're like, we're looking to you to see how we should resolve this. You know, they're really kind of relying on us to an extent to provide a reasonable solution. But they also have the long-term view in mind, you know, like what decision they make now is a precedence going forward. And how could this affect cities in 20, 30 years from now? And so it's all been a very big balance, honestly. I get their viewpoints. I'm also just advocating for, you know, a more attainable lifestyle for, you know, anyone else. So I would like to use this opportunity in my own situation right now to create a repeatable situation for other people across the country. So we're being very careful. It's now, gosh, it's mid-January. I got served the code violation in October. So as you can see, like we've had a few meetings going forward. Ours just got pushed this week, but I feel pretty hopeful about it. I don't know. It couldn't be better timing for me. You know, it's a great opportunity to find a solution, honestly. Because right now that's the major hurdle for people is why would you invest $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 in something when you might be asked to leave, even if you own the property, you know? So it's a tough situation, but big things are changing. So we got approval on that appendix. I'm sure you guys have heard from now, which was a very big deal. Like people were coming up to us at the event and like, you guys know that doesn't just happen, right? Like people don't write a new code, stand before us and get it approved in one shot. It takes 2, 3, 4 times, which is actually 6, 9, 12 years, because it's 3 years in between. But it was a very big deal that it passed and passed again. It passed several hurdles to get accepted in it. And it is. So that's going to help quite a bit in the legalization process.
So I want to propose something. Tell me if you think I'm exaggerating. It feels like after the 2008 financial crisis, I'm getting a little bit of echo, so I'm going to turn down here. It feels like after the 2008 crisis, then sort of the exploding student debt, the zero interest rates, it feels like a whole generation of people are saying, this system really, it's not very good for me, right? And so you say, owner-occupied affordable housing, and that's just a really resonant phrase, right? Because I feel like for many people, they feel like buying a house and living out the American dream is just not affordable. And so for me, it feels like tiny houses kind of reopen that door. It's like, yeah, not only is it possible, but it actually comes with these other benefits of sort of letting go of some things that sort of have kept people trapped for a long time. Am I exaggerating the sort of significance of the movement?
No, I don't think so. And, it's so many different factors too. The generation before us, I'm going to say us as a millennial, the generation before the millennials had different motives, like there was this prestige that came with a nice, huge house that can give everybody their private space. And coming from architecture, there's a lack that you're doing yourself a disservice. You're doing a family a disservice by providing everybody their own space where they never have to have those casual interactions. People get mad and they go to their room. And, I was the dramatic kid that goes to my room, shuts the door, and 2 days later I come out ready to talk again, and that does such a huge disservice to a family unit. You have to, there's numerous studies about how much healthier a house is when you've got the chance for and workspaces too, not just housing, but spaces in general. If you have the opportunities for unexpected and casual, you bump into each other, you talk, you work things out. That's how relationships get formed. And so when this other generation that now, they value these the bigger house and the more space, and they need room for, all the relatives to come stay for Thanksgiving, that one day a year. The Black Friday, I always say it's the Black Friday design. You design for your worst case scenario instead of just working that out as you need to. You design for that, and you miss so many opportunities of human interaction. And I think that by providing all that space, this generation has come to realize that that's not necessarily the best. And it's not so bad to be forced to interact. And I think the pendulum swings the other way. Whether it's too far the other way, it's probably that's what happens. You go really far one way and then you go really far the other way. My, I guess purpose, or my motives to staying inside this movement is to get people to consider what the right size is. It's probably not 2,800 square feet. It's probably not 200 square feet for most people, but somewhere in between. Bigger is not always better. And for me, a lot of it was, okay, is it possible to live in this space? And I actually thought it would be really difficult, and it's not at all, and yeah, maybe, 400 square feet would be better. Who knows? Life changes as life changes. But right now we're 4 years, we're debt free, we're living life. And this has been exponentially better than my previous 2,400 square foot house, But I think other factors come into play too, like the digital era. There's people who never work in an office space. They can work from literally anywhere in the world that has Wi-Fi. At first, I think the goal was to make a tiny house so you didn't have this big burden. And kind of the progression of the movement. Jay Schaefer, I will credit, because I think he's to be credited. He used to live in an RV, and he hated the RV because it, would get condensate during the winter, and it had all kinds of other problems because they weren't meant to be lived in full time. But the size wasn't the problem. He wanted the small size, just sound construction, like a standard house. So he wanted to build a small house. His city wouldn't let him. So his loophole was to put it on wheels so they didn't govern it, which worked for one reason. He wanted to stay put, though. Originally, he wanted to be on a foundation, and the wheels were kind of a loophole. I think that it's changed enough right now that there are cities all over that are more than willing to let you have a tiny house on a foundation. That is like exponentially easier to do. A city would love for you to approach them about that issue rather than a tiny house on wheels. But by opening that box, you opened up other opportunities. So I think probably about half the people that are into tiny houses are into tiny houses on foundation, but the other half has a whole different set of motives. There's all sorts of traveling positions now. My brother works in construction management, and they have employees that are on site for 3-6 months at a time, and then they go to another place, and they stay in hotels, where having a tiny house on a wheels offers them the opportunity to have a house that, they could just take with them. There's a lot of reasons why that appeals to that demographic. There's also traveling nurses, teachers. There's a lot of traveling positions now. There's a lot of millennials who work from literally anywhere in the world. We're going on a road trip for a year starting in April, and we work online fully. So why not? Why not bring your home with you? And there's, the older demographic, where you, instead of sending your mother to a nursing home, we just got done my grandmother just passed away, but we had to put her into a nursing home. It was $6,600 a month, and that was pretty low. Where she was okay, she just needed someone around, and we could have managed it, but we didn't have the room, and she wanted more independence than that. But it would have been a great solution to have a tiny house and, behind my folks' house where we could be there for her. And not only would that be convenient, that's way healthier than segregating generations. It allows a way for people to maintain independence but stay close to one another. So I think there's a whole plethora of reasons why tiny houses have just taken off and become so crazy popular. I don't think it's easy to pin down one golden reason why, but they appeal to a lot of people.
So I'm going to dive deep even further. Do you think it's possible that what we're witnessing is the tension between individualism and institutions? I mean, institutions kind of depend on you not feeling empowered, so they need them. And part of the story that you've told here is sort of the degree to which you did something that a lot of people would say, well, you can't do that. How does somebody do that? How does somebody build a house? Like, we've lost this sense historically that we're capable of actually providing for our own housing.
Yeah, I actually, that was a like the main thread of my Jamboree talk was, why do we feel like we're not capable anymore? It's so much easier to tell ourselves 100 times we can't do that than it is to tell ourselves maybe we can. And it's so important to tell yourself maybe you can. We used to do this, and my analogy in my talk at the Jamboree was Henry Ford. He did amazing things for business, but he crushed the spirit of Americans, and that's dramatic, but it's also true. Like, he segmented the workforce, and he made it efficient by, you're doing one thing all day, every day, and you're really, really good at that one thing. And it was horrible for the employees right off the bat. And he said something along the lines of, the best or the most innovative thing he ever did was raise wages, because he put everyone else out of business. He made people happier doing one thing every day. And then over time, over a generation of people, you start to think that you can only do one thing, all day. And so anytime there's something that doesn't fit in your wheelhouse, you think you need to go find an expert. But the thing about tiny houses, like, they're very, very daunting, as a whole. If you think about, like, oh, I don't know how to do this, you can overwhelm yourself really fast. But I'm telling you, coming from the building industry, there is nothing that's rocket science about a tiny house. Everything can be broken down into little bites. Everything is the most basic version of that system you can get. Your electrical, like, the most complicated you're going to get maybe is like a 3-way switch or a 2-way switch. And you can probably design around that. You don't have to do that. It really amounts to running wires and hooking them up into the right spots. And yeah, you got to do that research, but it's overwhelming and daunting as a whole. But I try to ask people to debunk those roles that you can't do it. Throw that out the window, because in previous generations, that's what you did. Is something needed to be done, so you did it, and it's this kind of societal norm now that we're experts in our field, and that's what we do, nothing else. And that's not true. That people are very capable creatures, and we have an immense capacity to learn. You just got to stop telling yourself you can't do it,
This touches so profoundly on the education work that I do, but we'll save that for another event. But it's part of this whole process of feeling that you need to follow, and someone else is telling you what to do. And the whole concept of agency is a difficult one, because we don't really provide for a lot of agency.
Yeah. No, there's no safety nets either. It's crazy. James and I, in our previous lives, we're both in architecture. And I remember when we started dating, James was telling me about how he wanted to quit his corporate job. He always worked for big corporate people, and I always like working for smaller firms, so you got to do more stuff. And I like variety. It's the spice of life. But I remember him saying he wanted to quit, and I was like, are you crazy? You can't do that, and he did. And it was harder for me than it was for him. And he's doing so much better than he would have if he stayed in his job. He's working so much less, making so much more money. And, when I quit my job, it was kind of, I'm not going to say forced, but I had a kid, it was kind of a break. And then when you have a kid, it's like, if you have the opportunity not to go back to work, it's so counter to look at a 6-week-old baby and say, oh, you're old enough, you could kick this on yourself, and go back to work. It's so hard. It's probably like the most painful idea I had in front of me ever was, people go back to work right now, and I just couldn't do it. And it became a very easy choice for me to quit my job for that reason, not because I was confident in myself, but it's been the best thing for me as well. Like, we can both dictate our own schedules. It's so much easier, and it's just daunting. I don't know why society as a whole, and even my parents were concerned. My brothers are like, well, what are you going to do? How are you going to pay the bills? It's like, well, first of all, I've minimized them considerably, and I can probably pick up enough jobs, here and there, and get it done. And you can. It's amazing, but I could never go back.
I'm loving this conversation. Thank you for who you are.
Oh,
So this, my sense is that this produces a little bit of tension. So my son and I bought a schoolie. We bought an old school bus this year, and he's
yeah.
been converting it to an apartment for him and his wife and their daughter.
Oh, that's
And
awesome.
what's that?
Hey, so that's awesome. I love it.
It's really fun. It's a big project, but he's doing it, and he's learning a ton, like you said. Um, but I talk to people about schoolies, and it's kind of like, oh, that's not really part of our vision of the tiny house world, right? That the tiny house world is a little bit becoming driven by those who have financial interest in manufacturing tiny homes, and that makes sense. They
I
have
don't
got to
even
get the product.
necessarily think it's that. I think that people like being clicky. And I think it's just grown enough that we're able to have clicks within it. There's the schoolie clicks, and there's the vintage camper clicks, and there's, the under 100 square foot, the micro housing, they've got their clicks, and, 400, those people just don't know what they're doing. Like, I think it's just grown enough that people are naturally clicky, and they find it. Personally, myself, like, if you're challenging yourself and we almost built a schoolie. We ended up buying a vintage camper, redoing that. We're rebuilding that right now. But if you're challenging yourself, if you're learning, and if you're going forward, and if you're thinking about the effects of your environmental impact, if you're thinking about your financials, you're so much ahead of the curve. There's so many people that aren't there yet. And I say aren't there yet, and I don't mean it to sound condescending, but when I was building, I had so many people tell me I didn't know what I was doing, that I was crazy. And it is such a gratifying feeling for those people to come around and be like, that's a pretty cool idea that you did that. I'm looking at that too. There is nothing more gratifying than somebody who was a total butthead to you coming by and being like, that was actually kind of smart. It's like, really? Because you made it very difficult in the moment for me to, go forward. Whatever direction you're going, I say find your helpers, and you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. If 4 of those guys are telling you can't, you're gonna believe you can't also. So find the people who believe you can and will and should, and then go. Like, you choose who you hang around, and pick your crowd wisely is always my advice towards that. But it is very gratifying when they come back and be like, that was pretty good of you.
I love this independent sort of streak you have, spirit that you have. So speaking of crowds, I went to the Florida Tiny House Festival a
Yes.
couple of months ago, and they expected 4,000 to 5,000 people, and 60,000 people showed up.
Yeah, it's crazy, huh?
So is this just a longing for this sort of simpler life? How much of this is just kind of the circus? People really live in a house this small? I'm going to go check it out.
There's definitely people that, and you can tell I can tell now when somebody asks for an interview or something, I can tell if they want to tell a story like I'm a circus sideshow, or if they're genuinely interested, and it's some hard lessons to learn how to tell the difference. But I think there's a lot of people that are just curious right now, and there's a lot of people that want to see these people. Like, even at the Jamboree, there was people like talking about, yeah, I just had to see these people. They didn't care about the houses; they saw the people as something comical. And that's too bad for them that they can't open up a little bit, maybe see the value in it. Just like life, people are interested in things for all different sorts of reasons. And the interest is what drives the progression of things. We would not have passed the IRC appendix had there not been 60,000 people show up there, 60,000 people at the Jamboree, people calling their local jurisdictions. Even if they're not really interested, they're calling to ask about it. There's the curiosity there. And that's what helps the movement go forward. So no matter what your reasons are, I feel like it's good for me. You just have to
So
be aware, and if depending on your reasons, be aware, because like all things, some people don't have your best interests in mind, and we're definitely to that point in the tiny house movement. Unfortunately, it started with such a small group of people that was really tight knit, and it's not that necessarily anymore. So just buyer beware, and find your own motives and go forth.
do you find that when you meet people who live on a houseboat or in an RV, or some other form of a trailer, manufactured home. Do you find that you're able to have a conversation about minimal living, or are they separate worlds?
I don't find myself talking about housing with people more than I like to. I hate being, this is like a challenge for me because I try so hard. My identity is not tied to this house. For me, this house is just a thing. This is a tool that enables the lifestyle I choose to run, But before I lived in a tiny house, I didn't go to people and talk about houses with them. But it's crazy how much it becomes a part of your identity just because we are so new in the movement still. It's this really unique thing that people are drawn to or appalled by. But I pride myself on being able to talk to just about anybody about just about anything. I prefer to talk to the individual more than about the house. But I do have people come up to my door. Like I had one person come up to my door and showing me this scrapbook of her uncle that lived in this RV for 5 years. And I was just like, cool. What was his name? Like it's for me, it's less about the housing than it is the people. But I guess, yeah, I can find commonalities about housing. Like we talked about before, there is a little bit of the cliques, there's the schoolie people, there's the sailboat people, there's self-built, there's hired, like there's all different classes, I guess you fit in. For me personally, I say hoorah to all of them.
How much of this for you relates to minimalism? Do you use that word in describing yourself at all?
Other people use that word in describing me, and I'm a part of several minimalist groups on Facebook. They're really helpful and really encouraging. The reason that I do it, a lot of it for me is environmental. The whole reason I went into architecture was it was the way I could have the most impact on the world. When I was growing up, everything like cars were evil. They had so much pollution, but really when you look at it, buildings produce 70% of pollutions in the air. If you can impact that on some level, you're impacting an immense amount of the environmental implications. So for me, I went into architecture based on that. And then I kind of got into architecture, and there's no money in residential design. You don't need an architect to do a house. It's only, the 10,000 square foot houses that even hire architects for. But it was the most opportunity to affect that change. Everybody has a house. Well, most people have a house, and not everybody has an office they go to. So if you can impact housing, you can impact the environment in a substantial way. And not only that, people aren't interested in learning how to do better at their work offices. That's just where they go throughout the day, and then they come home. They're interested in saving utilities because that affects their pocketbook. And so for me, I found a great deal of passion in helping people learn how to work their buildings better, how to make them fit their lives better. There's a lot of interest from me in that. And for me, having people think twice about the most environmental thing you can do is minimize your square footage. That's less utilities you're using, that's less materials you're using. And everything has, not just the real value, you can go down the street and get it at Home Depot, but there's embodied energy in absolutely everything you do. That 2x4 didn't just show up at Home Depot. It was logged and trucked somewhere and then milled and then sent somewhere else likely and then sent, to Home Depot. There's a lot of embodied energy in every single thing you buy, not just building material, but definitely building material too. And so the best thing you can absolutely do is minimize your square footage. And if I can prove that it's possible to live in a smaller space, it might make people feel a little more confident that maybe they could do a little less, and so that's my passion within the movement. Otherwise, it's just a thing. It's a house,
I read Jay Schaefer's book, about the same time I saw the movie Cowspiracy, and both had sort of this similar message. Jay's was like you have just said, the actual environmental impact of housing. Cowspiracy was about animal agriculture. Yeah. It's really interesting to have your mind kind of changed about something.
Yeah.
I led group tours for 5 years. I do a fair amount of travel. And when I go around the world, I'm always interested that what we consider a tiny house in a lot of places in the world is just the standard. It's
Yeah.
just, that's what you
Yeah.
can afford, and that's what you build.
Well, that's where Americans show their ignorance a lot. Like the most adamant people against tiny houses have no idea about that. They just have no idea that's how the rest of the world lives. That's actually how your ancestors used to live too. They just always it's crazy. It's crazy the ignorance that you encounter. And that people can just say things and not even think it's rude. Like my mom's really good friend was talking to me. She's like, "So are you still living in that house?" And I was like, "Yeah, you know." And she's like, "My rabbit couldn't even live in that space." And I was like, "Do you know how rude that was that you just said that to me?" Like it just like people just don't even know. They're just it's not even in their realm sometimes.
Hargadon is an Irish name, and years ago I met a woman who'd been raised by my great grandfather, and we discovered the family farm in Ireland. And I went and found this house, and I think they had 8 kids in this generation, and it was tiny. It's smaller than my current office. I
Yeah.
couldn't. I mean, I had to bend over to even be in there. And I thought, they lived their lives mostly outdoors. I think.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, yeah, I think that's a misconception too. People tell me that all the time. It's like, well, yeah, you guys just go out a lot. It's like, no, I'm a homebody. Actually, I'm in here quite a lot. Like, so I think it just gets back to people. Like, some people are way more outdoorsy. Like Samantha and Robert Garlow, they're outdoors every weekend. They go to the most magnificent places like ever. They're from New York and they went to the Pacific Northwest because they like the mountains, and boy do they ever explore them. I live vicariously through them, but I don't want to be out there. I mean, it's cool, it's awesome in pictures, but I like my bed. And so I think there's as many different ways to live in a tiny house as there is people and ways they live. So
I try and think about what it would be like to have lived back in the 1870s, like my great grandfather did. And I mean, it wasn't like there was anything to do indoors, probably.
yeah.
You had, they were farmers. They were probably sheep
I mean,
farmers.
people had to use their imaginations.
I don't, it probably would be romanticizing that existence to try and sort of put on top of it our own, the way we spend our days. I
Yeah.
think it was rough. My guess is it was pretty rough.
I don't know. Like I think it's people again. I'm kind of a farm girl. I My grandparents are cattle ranchers, and I spent a lot of time there with them, and I loved that lifestyle. They were hard people in the country, and I loved every bit of it. And I hated. I love my parents, but I kind of hated our upbringing. My parents were really proud of their jobs and their very successful careers. And it's exactly what they wanted. They wanted to provide a great lifestyle for us, but I just wish that they would stay home. My parents worked 60 hours a week. I was the youngest of three, and my older two siblings are boys. So the boys shared a bedroom. I had to have my own bedroom, and I hated that. I didn't want my own bedroom. I wanted to share with my brother Nathan. He's my best friend, but I was the girl, and I had to have my own room. And it just like everything that normal people probably are like, oh, you had a great childhood. I just hated it, and I wanted to be country. I wanted to go get our own water, because we had to do that. And I like engaging with life on that level, and I think that lends itself to depending on the house. Tiny houses aren't for everyone. They do kind of force you to engage with the world on a different level. um, yeah, you can design them just like every other house where you don't. But I like that about it. I like that I'm aware of where my water goes when it's done. I like that I save the sewage and I have to deal with my own waste. And I like that I cook differently because I am concerned about where the bacteria goes, and you just engage with the world on a much different level. At least in my experience in my tiny house, there are higher tech ones that you don't have to do that with. But I think that that's what I like about it is kind of engaging a little bit better with the world around me. You went away. You're gone. Oh.
So I think I dropped off.
You did. You
Yeah,
went
I
away.
did. So what did you say? What did I miss?
It's, well, what did you hear last?
Oh, I can't remember.
Okay. Well, we were talking about you were saying it would be hard, to live in our ancestors' shoes. And I think I probably do romanticize it a little bit myself, but I think that that's a healthier and more profound way to live in my eyes than how we are now, where everything's so removed, where you throw away the garbage and you never visit a landfill, or you flush the toilet and you never go to a water reclamation site. And I think that that's one thing that being in architecture has given me is the experience to see that. You see the whole life cycle. And I really like that about the tiny house. I'm engaging with my world and my house and my processes far more than I ever did in my standard house. Like I manage my own waste. I manage my own wastewater. I manage, all my like garbage, like you interact with it more. And I think for me, that's a really positive thing. And I think that it would be a really positive thing for more people if we got over the stigma of that's what poor people do. Like it's if you're doing that, then you're obviously not smart enough to not do that. Which it's interesting. We live in an interesting time, and I don't think it's exactly a healthy time. And not emotionally, not psychologically, but like I don't think it's good for our community to be as removed as we are from the effects of our systems. And I think that's one thing I really like about tiny houses is it just engages people more in their daily life activities.
So thread that together with your DIY interests. Talk a little bit, if you would, about what you do as a do-it-yourselfer.
The there's more value in the world than money. There's more rating systems of value than just money. And I think that that's all that people see sometimes. And it's important that we see more than that. Relationships are a value metric, and what are we missing out on relationships by not engaging with people and processes? You get to know yourself better when you build something. When like my daughter just pointed out on the when I was drywalling my ceiling, I had a chunk in the mud, and I did that, and I have this big line across my ceiling, and my daughter goes, "Mommy, what's that?" And I got to explain to her that when Mommy built this house, then she messed up right there. And it's such a little moment, but like it's important to show your kids that everyone messes up. But I think the message is I did it. And she was like, "You built the house?" Like she's totally just getting to a point that's really fun to see. And it's making me proud all over again. This 5-year-old house is, still providing opportunities through these mistakes, which mistakes are normally demonized, but they're pretty cool too. Did you drop off again? You did. Hey,
I'm obviously having internet issues today. So
I'm glad it's not.
I love the story about your daughter. Who's ever listening to the recording, they're going to have heard the whole story.
Oh,
So
good.
feel free to just move forward from there.
Okay. Um, but this is kind of why I'm in the DIY aspect. It's like none of this for me is about the house. You know, if I couldn't live here tomorrow, I'm totally okay with it. I have totally benefited from this journey because it's going through the act of building your own house, even if you're not building it, but if you design it and if you really engage in the process, it's a way of building yourself, and building your confidence and building your person, like you don't it's so easy to not really know who you are, where if you have to think about how you do things in every aspect of your day and design a space that works for that, your house is going to be as unique as your fingerprint, and it should be, because you are a unique person. And I think that building your own house is that act of exploration far more than it is the end product. It's the journey of getting there that builds you as a person and changes the way you view the world and interact with the world. Which is, I mean, that's why I always, people are like, can I buy your plans? I'm like, do your own, build your own, and equip yourself with the knowledge you need to do this for yourself, because you'll get so much more out of it than just a house, but you'll also get a house.
So if we start there with do your own plans, what are the other kind of top lessons that you end up telling people about building a tiny home or living tiny?
Oh gosh, it's all basic information. Just think about the systems you use in a house. That's how I approach it. You want to build a house? Okay. What are the 10 things that you absolutely cannot live without? If you can think of 20, great, but don't think of no more or no less than 10. You need at least 10 must-have things for your tiny house. Mine were things like, I like hot showers, really, really hot showers, and long, really hot showers. So I wanted endless water and an oversized shower because I didn't want to feel cramped. I wanted a Great Dane. The blue Great Dane has been my dream dog since I was 6, and I couldn't have one in an apartment, and I wanted a house that fit a blue Great Dane. And there's some design, things I did to accommodate him. I put stairs in so he could get up to the bed. He's got to turn around. He's got like a 3-point turn at the end of the hallway because he's a big dude. King size bed, just list everything you can that you must have in your tiny house. There's really no limitations. It's not about limitations. And if you're missing something on your must have list, then it's not going to be a successful project for you. The idea is enabling the lifestyle you want, not making compromises. And I think in most cases, I used to say that the only things I don't think could fit is an elevator and a bowling alley. And I've seen so many different elevators now. So yeah, you might not have a bowling alley, but just list out your top priorities. And then once you have those, it's really hard to look at a blank slate and go, but if you have those parameters, you can start to fit them together like a game of Tetris, and you can find ways to maximize space that work for you. But it's that kind of thought to your day and what's important to you that is required to make a successful project in the end, and one that you're living in for more than a month or two, because if it doesn't work for you, it's not going to work for you. That's just the way it works. So, and then, think about systems. It's easy for people to say, I could never have a composting toilet. And so they quit, and okay, how about an incinerating toilet, a dry flush toilet? Have a flush toilet. That's fine. Like, what are your must-haves? There are so many solutions to every design project out there. You just can't stop yourself before you get off the ground. If you think that way, it's likely someone else has too. And if not, maybe you can invent something. People just place so many limitations on themselves, and it's important to get past that and stop doing that. Your own greatest limitation most of the time.
You're a terrific voice for the do-it-yourself aspect of tiny houses. What about lessons related to family living in a tiny house?
Families are hard, and that has nothing to do with the house. There's a lot of people that ask me, like, what would you change? I would have put in a bathtub had I known I was going to have a family. That's really all. The house has very little to do with the difficult parts of raising a family. Um, I'm very grateful for the house every single day because it gives me the opportunity to raise my kids this way. And it forces those interactions. I hear a lot that you don't even have anywhere to go when they're crying. Like, why would I go away from my kids when they're crying? Like, that's when they need you. So it just is a different way of, gosh, the parent topic is such a judgy, hard one. Like, that is not a judgment against other parents that need space from crying babies. But like, for me, that's not how I work. When they're crying, I want to run to them, and I can, and I can because of this. And I don't really have those issues. My kids, I don't know if I just got lucky or if it's helpful to raise them in a tiny house. It's hard being a parent wherever you are. But I can tell you very genuinely and very honestly that I am grateful every single day for my tiny house because it gives me the opportunity to raise my kids this way. And they know I'm here. I'm here with them every day. I teach them. I interact with them. A lot of those baby items, people are like, where do you fit all the things? I remember when my house went on Yahoo, when I got like super famous for my house, I was pregnant with my daughter, and I was so scared because she was not planned. She was a whoopsie. I thought I had the whole thing figured out. I'm grateful for her, but I was scared beyond my wits because I was 6 months pregnant, and everybody was critiquing me very openly online about how I know nothing about being a parent. Obviously, I won't even make it until I was 8 months pregnant. I'll be staying at a hotel, and I'm just reading them going, oh my God, I don't know what I'm doing, But at the same time, that situation gave me a foundation to critique or to bunk all the parenting pressures, because there's just as much, parenting pressures as there is tiny house pressures. People just always tell you don't know what you're doing. But babies don't need all that stuff. It turns out we didn't used to have all that stuff. We were talking about our ancestors. They didn't have rockers and bouncers and jumpers, and those are convenience items for parents. And in a great many cases, they're not even healthy for the kids. They don't help with the development. They'll slow development. And they take up space. But what they do is help an employer by occupying your kid for a little bit of time so you can get more work done for somebody else, But it's, for me, this whole situation has been about designing my life where I get to engage in it, and for me, a big part of that right now, obviously, I have a 1-year-old and a 2-year-old, is engaging with my kids and being there and being the parent for them. And this provides me the opportunity to be able to do that. So I don't need those convenience items that would allow me to put my attention elsewhere. When they want rocked, I can rock them, which is an extreme blessing in today's day and age. It's just a different way of operating, and it still baffles people when, like, every time I was pregnant, both times I was pregnant, it's time to upgrade now. It's like, no, that's a downgrade. Like, getting a bigger house feels like a downgrade to me right now. And it's just a different way of operating. It's been really interesting. I'm a person who compares myself. My brother just had a baby, and they live in a standard house. And it's just different to see the different approaches to parenting that people have. I'm grateful that I have my path, because without the tiny house, quite frankly, I wouldn't have that opportunity. I would have a mortgage or a big rent payment or something to pay that would require me to work more hours one way or another, whether it be for myself or for someone else. And having this allows lower expenses where I can focus my attention on my kids, which is, I think, where it needs to go right now for me, not anyone else.
I can't tell you how glad I am that you were able to do this. When I saw you at the Jamboree, I was like, she's number one on my list. I really want Macy to give a keynote.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I don't even know what to say to that. I appreciate that.
Okay, thanks, Macy. I'm gonna stop the recording now.
Cool.
I hope everybody's enjoying the Tiny House Summit.
Thanks, guys.